Hi everyone, my name is Julian and I'm going to share about my lessons of product localization from Airbnb. Before we get started, I just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. I've actually been working as a product manager for the past 7 years, and I've been very fortunate to be the first product manager in Asia for all of these companies, including Airbnb, WeWork, and now Goat. Prior to becoming a product manager, I was one of first 2 localization managers at Airbnb, and so that's also where I'm going to be referencing from for a lot of this presentation. Over the years, I've worked on quite a few products, including the global and China-specific versions of Airbnb's web and mobile products. I've worked on WeWork's China marketing site, as well as a few WeChat mini programs. And then most recently, I've also been working on Goat's global apps, as well as our localized WeChat mini program for China. Essentially, a lot of my experience have been around internationalizing and localizing products for a wider audience. And so this is why I'm bringing you 2 presentations about what I've learned over the years. Now, a lot of what I'm going to share actually applies to all of the companies and products that I've worked on, but I'm using Airbnb as an example because it's probably the most relatable and comprehensive. So with all of that said, I'd like to start with sharing the key takeaways of this particular presentation. First of all, I wanted you to know that product localization is very important and crucial, and I'm going to talk about why. As part of that, translation is a key aspect of localization, and it is actually very difficult to do well because of the various complexities. So you'll find out more about those. Beyond translation, however, localization is also much more than just translation, and so I'm going to elaborate on that as well. By the end of this, I'd love for everyone to acquire an appreciation for good localization and hopefully start applying these learnings to your own products as well. Sounds good? All right, let's get started. Now, some of you may not know that Airbnb actually stands for Air Bed and Breakfast. And it was started back in 2007 in San Francisco when the 2 co-founders, Brian and Joe, wanted to rent out their extra space in their living room to make some extra money. Fun fact, I've actually stayed in that apartment before. Anyway, Airbnb has grown tremendously over the years, and these are some numbers that illustrate how big it has become. 500 million guest arrivals historically. On average, 2 million guests staying on an Airbnb per night. 6 million active listings across 191 countries and regions and across 100,000 cities. And $65 billion earned by hosts historically. With such a global business in our hands, it's not hard to understand why localization is very important for Airbnb. In fact, even back in 2015, 2/3 of Airbnb's trips were already crossing a country border. When looking at web traffic, our homepage was viewed 65% of the time in a non-English language. More than half of our Help Center views were also in a non-English language. And this one is particularly interesting. 61% of bookings were made with either the host or the guest using Airbnb in a non-English language. Now, with so many of our users being international and multilingual, we obviously had to translate our content into more languages to meet the needs of our users. And translation was actually a big undertaking for us. Even back when we first started, we were already spending a lot of money and resources in this area. We were spending on average $100,000 a month in human translations, and more than $50,000 in machine translations. And we had more than 5.6 million words live on the site across 26 languages. Fast forward to today, I learned in the news recently that Airbnb is now translating over 100 million words in 1 year. And it now supports 62 languages instead of 26. And so the scale has grown to be even more massive nowadays. Now, for those of you who have translated anything before, I'm sure you would agree that producing good translations is rather difficult. A really good translation is not word for word, but one that carries its true meaning and intentions and tone and so on. And as for Airbnb, it's particularly hard for a number of reasons. First of all, there's just a lot of content to be translated in terms of both the sheer volume and diversity. And because of that, the prioritization of what needs to be translated first then becomes very important. On the other hand, most of our translators were freelancers, and so it was very important for them to understand the proper contexts in order to provide good translations. As mentioned, direct translations are often odd-sounding and unnatural, but translators are usually paid per word, and so they're often motivated to translate as quickly as possible, and that would also affect the quality delivered. As a result, additional efforts will have to be spent on quality assurance, and it is often very time-consuming and costly. Moreover, beyond just the process of translation itself, there's a lot of work and collaboration with the product and engineering teams that's required to gather content to be translated in the first place, and subsequently to display translated content properly. With all of this in mind, translation is a constant exercise of balancing speed, quality, and consistency. And that's why I say that it's a really big undertaking. Let's take a look at some examples of what I just described. In terms of the types of content that we would translate, there's content from our core user flows on the website. There's various transactional and marketing emails. There's introductions of our new product offerings. There's our blog posts, help center articles, and different marketing landing pages. And there is also content from our mobile apps, of course, App Store descriptions, and other special projects. Now, because of such diversity and volume of content, we needed a tool to manage the translations of so many different content types. And thankfully, we had a super talented engineer, Jason, on the team, and he took it upon himself to build up an internal tool. And this is what it looks like. It automatically prioritizes strings based on page views, and so we could make sure that the most visible content is translated first. It provides translators with glossaries, history, and the option to use Google Translate to make it easier and more consistent to produce faster and higher quality translations. For web content, it would even capture screenshots automatically to show translators where the string is located and how it's being displayed for better contexts. And there's even a contextual translation mode that allows translators and proofreaders to submit translations and feedback directly on the website. Now, obviously, even with all of these advanced features, we're still not able to provide sufficient contexts for every scenario. And so we still needed to spend a lot of effort reviewing the translated content even after it's completed in this bulk environment. After translations have gone live on the site, we would ask our proofreaders to review the translated content on the site or the app, take screenshots, and annotate issues that they see. Here's an example for Bahasa Malaysia. Here's an example for Japanese. And here's for Korean. As you can see, it really takes a lot of work, and we had to pay our proofreaders hourly instead of per word because of the nature of the work. Besides, identifying all the issues is just part of the process, and is equally time-consuming to then go into the translation tool, finding all of these corresponding strings, and changing them. Anyway, for those of you who are interested to learn more about the technical aspects behind our translation tool and architecture, here's a blog post written by our engineer Jason about this topic, and so please be sure to check it out. Also, I would assume that most companies would not go about building your own internal tool like we did, and so I'd recommend checking out existing solutions out there, such as this one called Phrase, that provides a lot of features that I've introduced just now. By now, if I haven't already convinced you how important localization is, these subsequent bad examples should provide you with the added motivation. And just to clarify, these are real examples from our live product, and they're honestly rather embarrassing. Take a look at this half-translated email with 3 languages in total. And this partially translated Korean homepage. Here you can see that the Japanese font size is completely messed up on the sign-up screen and on the review screen. And how our UI broke up single Russian words into 2 lines. In this example, the Russian copies are all overlapping in the UI over here. And over here. And for this final example, some of the Chinese speakers in the audience may be able to catch it, but we have mistranslated Visa, as in the credit card, as travel visa on the payment page, which is obviously a huge mistake to make in such a visible part of the core user journey. I mean, it's very understandable why the translator has made such a mistake, especially since Airbnb is a travel company, but this definitely goes to show how important it is to have accurate context when it comes to product translations. From the above examples, you can see that localization is really not just about translating the texts. It's also very much about the font size, line breaks, and UI fit. It's about having the right context, relevance, and the right tone of voice. Oftentimes, it's also about displaying the right date and number format, currency, phone numbers, and email addresses. And it would also cover non-textual content and assets such as screenshots, icons, logos, illustrations, and videos. On the other hand, it's also worth mentioning that product copies, such as different marketing slogans, may also have legal implications, and so that is also an important consideration. Now, after looking at all of those bad examples, let me show you some examples of better localization. This here is the app introduction page that we have built later on. Notice how all of the assets, including the buttons and the screenshots, are properly localized. We even went as far as localizing the names and faces in the screenshots to match the nationality of the language. And here we have spent the effort of localizing our host's guarantee icon in all of these languages. This, however, is very time-consuming, and so subsequently, some of the newer pages that we built included non-textual icons and illustrations that make it more universally applicable and much easier to localize. On top of just static content and assets, we also went about localizing video content. In February of 2015, our marketing team launched a global campaign, and they've produced many localized versions, including ones for Asia. See if you can spot the difference between the two versions played at 5 times speed. Here's the first one. And here's the second one. Did you get it? Actually, the only difference between the two videos, apart from the dubbing, is the scene when the train was going through the skyscrapers in the night, and you can see that the texts being displayed on the billboards are localized in Japanese and Korean. A year later, in 2016, the team went at it again and produced another campaign. Here's the Korean version. And here's the Japanese version. Have you spotted more differences this time? As a start, the texts in the video were actually different. But more interestingly, the two ladies were actually different as well. Despite being neighboring countries, I was really impressed that our team still went about looking for a local talent to be featured in the video. Beyond that, you can also see that the featured destinations are also slightly different on the iPad, and even the names on the card are different. I mean, I'm not part of the production of these ads at all, but I'm just very proud of how much our teams cared and how they've delivered localized content with such attention to detail. Taking a step back, however, it's also important to realize that majority of these two productions still remain the same across different international versions. And so in a way, it was actually a very efficient use of our resources because of how much we could reuse for different markets and still make it feel local to the various audiences. Now, you may not know this, but similar strategies are quite commonly found in some of the most popular movies made by Marvel or Disney. Here's a scene from one of the Captain America movies, and they've actually localized the list of things that he missed while being frozen for different countries. In Zootopia, the movie makers have customized the minor news anchor character to be different for different countries. For the US is a moose, for Japan is a tanuki, for China is a panda, and for Australia and New Zealand is a koala. Now obviously such detailed customizations are not possible for every single movie, but whenever necessary, Disney would still create an international version apart from the US version that's more universal to wider audiences. For example, in the movie Up, the text on the money jar was replaced with an illustration in the international version. In Monster Inc., the texts on the cupcakes have been replaced with smiley faces. And in Toy Story, the American flag in the background was replaced with a globe in the international version. Now, there are plenty more of these examples, and you can look them up on YouTube. Last but not least, let's take a look at Apple. Apple is a company that is regarded at the highest level when it comes to localization. And if you look very closely, you can see all of the details that they have put into localizing their different versions, even though they look very similar. Just to name a few, you can see that all of their graphics have to be adapted and localized. The featured names are also local. The measuring units are different. The featured phone numbers are different. And the featured apps are also different. In the US, they're using Chase Bank as an example for the Face ID feature. And in the China version, they're using China Merchant Bank. Last but not least, you can see that while the layouts of the two versions are almost identical, the arrangement of the different cards are actually slightly different because not all features are available in all countries. In this example, paying back a friend in messages is only available in the US, and so they have omitted that in the China version. By using a design composed of these modularized content cards, Apple is able to easily configure and customize their content for different countries. So as you can see, good localization is a lot of hard work, but there are also different strategies to be smart about it and to maximize its impact. So to recap, I've shared with you, using Airbnb as a primary example, the reasons why localization is so important. I've also introduced you to the world of translations and how complicated and difficult it could be, and elaborated on why localization is much more than just translations. I've also shown you a lot of examples of both good and bad localization, and by now I trust that you should be able to appreciate great localization when you encounter them in the future. In the next presentation, I'm going to dive into how we localized our features using our experience in market entry into China, and it's also going to be a lot of fun. And with that, thank you for listening, and please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any questions.